Good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Welcome to a new webinar from the YESS community. I'm Valentina, I'm the YESS officer. And alongside with board team, Joro, Kodo, Julia, and Lina, we have been working organizing this new webinar. The topic today will be job hunting for ECRs in non-academic sectors. And today we have the pleasure of having three different speakers, Nube, Eleanor, and Anthony, from different parts of the world. They will be sharing with us their experience working in these different areas. And I will give the floor in a few minutes to Bertin, who will introduce better the speakers. But first, the code of conduct. Please be polite and respectful to the speakers and also to the rest of the participants that are here today. You can write your question in the chat box. If the question is for one specific person, please say to who you are asking your question. We will have a short Q&A after the presentations, and then we will divide it in three breakout sessions, and you will be able to ask more in-depth questions to each speaker in the time you have with these people. And the chat box and the presentations part will be recorded. It's already been recorded, and we will be uploading to our YouTube channel in the upcoming days. So now I will give the floor to Bertin, who will introduce the speakers.
Hi, so I'm really happy to introduce our three speakers. And the first one is Nube, González, Reviriego. So she's the Energy and Agricultural Technical Officer of the Copernicus Climate Change Services, also known as C3S, at the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, ECMWF. She received her PhD in Earth Sciences from the University of Salamanca, Spain, in 2015. She has extensive experience in the co-development and the implementation of climate services for different sectors with both private and public institutions, including renewable energy, agriculture, and the health sectors. She led the climate services team at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center in Spain for 8 years. She has participated as a climate services scientist in many national and European projects, and is currently involved in the C3S operational delivery of climate services to the energy sector. And our second speaker is Eleanor Middlemas. So Eleanor is a climate scientist specializing in climate risk modeling at PricewaterhouseCoopers, known as PwC. Her work includes assessing climate risk exposure and developing strategies for climate adaptation and mitigation. She has extensive experience in industrial roles, including climate data science sector and the health insurance data analytics. Eleanor earned her PhD degree in Marine and Atmospheric Science from the University of Miami. Prior to transitioning to the industry, she was a postdoc at the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences at the University of Colorado Boulder, where she worked on understanding the global climate system using statistics and global climate models. And our third speaker is Anthony Schrapffer. So Anthony is a research engineer in the EthiFinance analytics team, focusing on quantifying physical climate risk for financial institutions, while also collaborating on other quantitative projects, including credit risk methodologies, climate stress tests, biodiversity risk assessment. He previously worked with ING Group to develop their internal physical risk assessment tool, playing a key role in its design and implementation. Anthony holds a civil engineering degree from Mines de Nancy in France, and a PhD in climatology jointly supervised by the University of Buenos Aires and the Institut Polytechnique de Paris, where he specialized in numerical modeling and climate data analysis. So these are our three speakers today. So the first part of the webinar will be presentations from our speakers. Each of the speakers will present for about 15 to 20 minutes. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, that's the first part. And after the presentations, we'll have a short general Q&A sessions. Speakers will address some of the questions during the presentations or from the registration form. And after that, we'll have a breakout sessions. And I'll provide more details about the breakout sessions when we begin that part. So we'll start with our presentation right now. So I think Nube, you're the first one, so you can share your screen.
Sorry, yes, I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes, yeah, it looks good.
Perfect. So, first of all, good evening, everyone from Bonn. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar, and thank you for the presentation, board team. My presentation will be about job transition journey. I would like to call it like that because I would like to go through all the steps that usually people goes when they decide to change from one position to another. So let me start the presentation with this affirmation, which is that there are as many career paths as there are people. I think this is very important to keep in mind because sometimes we tend to just look other people's career as a reference to follow the same step in our career, when in fact I think the most important is to find your own career path. So there are not career paths predefined in principle. So each of us should find our path to follow, but just based on our interests and our preferences. So let me, oh, I don't know why. Okay, now it's working. So basically, I would like to share a little bit of my experience. So I did the traditional PhD at the university, just focusing on the main mode of climate variability over the Euro-Atlantic region. So this PhD was more scientific PhD, but not, they didn't have, it doesn't have implication with the society or was not something applied, let's say. So then when I was finishing my PhD, before finishing, I thought that I find myself to be an applied scientist. So then I thought that would be nice to look for something more applied. So something in which I can use my knowledge on the climate and climate variability to help society in their decision making. So then I was looking for some position, and I end up in a research institution in Spain, just working on the climate services arena. So as you might imagine, in the beginning, I was not pretty aware of what the climate services were, or I mean, was more a pure scientist. But then, I just would like, I'm sure that I really would like to apply my knowledge to society. So I started to learn and basically to listening to different users regarding what type of climate information they need in order to make their decisions. So then first you listen, then you start thinking with your knowledge on climate, what type of information you can provide to them, that can be useful for their decision, or what type of calculation you can do. For instance, you can provide with some climate indicators, or you can provide with some data set that the user might not be aware of, and they can use this information in their decision making. So during this period of my career, I have the opportunity to work in different national and international projects. Most of them were competitive projects in which we try to develop some climate services for different sectors, for agriculture, in particular for the wine sector. I have been working a lot of time, but also I have been working for the renewable energy sector, particularly for wind sector, but also for solar. And then I have also the opportunity to work for the health sector. So each of them has their own particularities, but I think the commonality between them is just being able to listen what are the user requirements, and then being able to transform this in something that can be useful for them, right? Just adding your knowledge on climate. Also, during that period, I had the opportunity to lead a team of people. When I left my position, I have, I think, 70 people within my team. And this gave me the opportunity to work with many different people, particularly with young scientists. And then I have the opportunity also to reflect on the how people, when they have to change from one job to another, sometimes they are struggling, right? And then, what are the main difficulties that people usually find? And I will talk more about that. But then just my last part of my career was an international institution. I'm working at the European Center for Medium Weather Forecast, particularly in Bonn, in Germany. I'm working at the Copernicus Climate Change Service, which basically aims to provide operational climate services for different sectors. But I'm working in particular for the renewable energy sector and for agriculture sector. So my role here is, again, different than my previous role. So I have to ensure the delivery of products that might be relevant for a specific sector, but also I'm in charge of making operational delivery of data sets through a platform that is called Climate Data Store, in which people can download for free different energy data sets that might be relevant for them. But all this information, of course, is free for everybody and is fully documented and traceable, all the science behind the computation of all this information. And also, I have to ensure the scientifically sound of partners' deliveries, because at the C3S, it's not myself calculating all the indicators, but we work in partnership. And then our partner usually make the technical work, but someone needs to ensure that this work is scientifically soundness, and also make sure that they accomplish what is relevant for the user, right? Okay. So then, yeah, as you might think, it could be easy for me to transition from one stage to the other. But in fact, I think as many of us, usually the transition are complicated, and sometimes you need a change in your career, but it's hard to take the step forward. And sometimes it's hard to also to realize and to accept that you need to change. So what I have found not only in my own experience, but working with some other colleagues, as I said before, with many young scientists, some of the more common symptoms that people have when they need to jump to a new job, usually there are type of thinking. So sometimes people, scientists, they are not sure if they would like to make science for the whole life. Sometimes they think that there is too much time devoted to work in the same topic, very precise topic, or feel a lot of pressure for writing papers and continue producing with no ending. Sometimes they feel like they have too many tasks at the same time and it's difficult to prioritize, so they feel a bit lost in the middle of this amount of work. Sometimes people need to have more action-oriented job, right, rather than pure science. But then usually you start feeling some of those, and if you don't do anything, many times you feel demotivated at some point, or you start feeling like find hard to accomplish some of the tasks that you have to do at work. And at the end, in some cases, you can end in a burnout. And well, I just would like to briefly mention that sometimes also behind all these symptoms, also there are some other, let's say, things going on, right? So there might be some imposter syndrome. This is something that usually is very common in science, but insecurity, so procrastination, also stress and anxiety, or also you might end up in a negative loop. But I think this is something that many of us have feel some of those at some point. But I think it's important to know that it's not only you, many people is struggling with this, and it's always a challenge to move from one job to another, and usually involve an internal personal process of setting priorities. And sometimes this is difficult to realize and difficult to set what are your priorities. So for those that you are in this situation, I would recommend to stop a little bit, just slow down and take some time to think about what you want to do. I think this is very important. At least for me, for jumping in my last position, was working to make a list of the positive and negative aspect of my last job, right? And then see what of those aspects would like to keep in my following job and which one would like to remove, right? So I think this is very important, because if you are able to disentangle all these aspects, then you will be doing a better application form for your next job, and also most probably a better interview. Also, I will recommend to talk with some colleagues who have changed jobs recently, so they might share with you their experience. Also, talk with people that work in different job positions outside of academia, for instance. And at some point, also, you can seek for professional help if needed. I mean, there are some counselor, or there are some coaching that help in those cases. And also, don't think that the requirement process is something like okay, I don't know, a black hole in front of you that you don't know how to pass through it. But think of the requirement process as a learning process, right? So you might have opportunities to engage in different requirement process till you find your new position. Once you have set your priorities and you have clear yourself internally, let's say, I will say that the next step is to take some action and start for searching for a job. In my case, I was working in a public research institution, and then I have the possibility to go to the industry, to the private sector. But in my case, I was not sure about this because some part of the public research is also interested to me. So then I consider some other option, like for instance, working in international organization that is not industry. Still, most of them are public institution, but there are some positions that you are not anymore like in the academia. You don't have anymore this, let's say, this pressure on the, writing paper all the time, making experiment, obtain your result, make a paper out of it, and so on and so forth. But there are some other type of job that you can do in which you can contribute with your previous experience. So then, if you think that this is something interesting for you, here I just try to, this last part of my presentation is just to give some tips on how to find this type of job. Usually, most of them can be found on the institution websites. Usually, it's easy to find it. For instance, I have included here 2 examples. Usually, they are in the About section, and then you can find jobs, or you can find career vacancies. And the most important is that each institution has their own rule. So it's useful to read the instruction on how to apply carefully before starting the application. When you go to those pages, usually you find a list of open positions for this institution. And in some of them, you can create alerts to receive new position in your emails account. I think this is quite useful in general. And then in most of them, you don't need to register yourself for see the current position, guys. So this is also good, I think. Usually you can get an idea of the job from the job title, but I would recommend to read the full description in case you have some doubt regarding what exactly you need to do in this position. Then the next step will be to make the application. So I would like to share, well, some of my own tips just to go through before application. So I think it's important to take time to read the job description and the requirement carefully before applying, because you might be able to first realize if you will really like the position or not. And then also you will be able to pay attention to the requirement. This is very important. Usually in this type of application, it's not anymore to send a random CV that you use for many different job offers. It's not about that, but usually it's more to fill a form in which most of the time you need to explain how you meet all the requirements that they include in the job position. So then, again, before application, I would recommend to just to think carefully about how your profile can match the different requirements, right? Just thinking on your previous experience. Of course, the more requirements you can relate to your previous experience, the more chances you have to get the interview stage. But I will say that if there are some requirements that you are not able to meet, it's not a problem. You can also do the application, and you can also say that, well, within your previous experience, you didn't cover those requirements, but you have done something that might be similar or might help you to learn what is needed for this requirement. So I think this is also, so it's important to think about all these type of things. Then it's important to pay attention to the deadline. So make sure that you don't miss them. And then start the application as soon as possible, because you might need time to fulfill the form, right? So it's something that maybe you don't do it in 1 hour, but you need a bit of, I mean, you can do it in 1 hour, but when you know what you are gonna write, which is usually the most difficult part and the part that you need more time to. Then during the application, I will say that usually you can start as soon as possible because you can start just including your personal details, and then most of this form, you can save it. So you don't need to cover all at once, but you can do in stages. I think it's also useful that you, for maybe there might have a question regarding how do you think that you meet the requirement, right? So in those points, keep your answer as short as possible and be concise in the information you are providing. I think this is one of the most important things to get a position in one international institution. Also, I think it's important, again, to be honest, always, during the application, but also during the interview. And if there are some requirements that you don't think you can meet, you can say it, and also express your willingness to learn new topics or to get some new abilities. I think this is also important, right, to mention the willingness to learn. And also, I will say that it's important to highlight not only the technical experience, but also your soft skill. And yeah, and then finally, make sure that you are receiving the emails from the form in your inbox and not in your spam. And just I'm finishing here, but just a few tips for the job interview. Sometimes if you get the interview, don't panic. I think you need to think in an interview as an opportunity to interact with the institution and the people you want to work for. And I will say that this is very important because you can get really useful information in those interviews in order to really understand if you really would like to work in this position or not. And I think it's important also to be yourself at the interview and don't exaggerate your skill, just to make sure that if you get the job, you will be able to perform the task, right? And you will be able to be happy doing that job. So I think this is also a very important point. Be confident in the interview, but don't overdo it. I think honesty is highly valued. So if you don't know something in one of the questions you receive, I think it's better to say that you don't know than to just to try to make it up somehow. And again, use the interview as an opportunity to learn more about the job position or the institution. And I would recommend you to bring a list of questions to ask during the interview. And then, of course, try to enjoy and learn from the process. I think this is very important. And also is like, if you take the opportunity of the interview as a learning process, then you remove a lot of the stress, let's say. And then just I would like to finish my presentation, just putting here a list of some international organizations that have climate job opportunities. The first 3 ones are European one, and the other 3 ones are just worldwide. So I just include the link for the job position, so you can give a look later, of course, because the presentation will be shared. And I think I will end here, but I'm really happy to also take your question, but also to maybe discuss some of your concern just in the breakout rooms, which will not be recorded, and you might feel more secure space. Thank you very much for listening.
And now we have Eleanor.
Hi. Yeah, 1 second here. Let me pull up my slides. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, it looks good.
Thank you. Okay, first I just want to say that presentation by Nube was awesome. I concur with almost everything she said. And hopefully I can add a little bit more to what she said. I think this presentation is going to be a little more specific about I'm gonna talk about what I do at PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC. Talk about my trajectory to get here. Much like Nube, my career has not been linear. And then I want to offer my own perspective on pursuing a new career if you'd like, and then landing that job if you so choose. So to start, my name's Eleanor. I'm a manager on PricewaterhouseCoopers climate risk modeling team. So we refer to PricewaterhouseCoopers as PwC. In general, and one reason why I work at PwC is I love working with people. I generally prioritize any work that relates to Earth's climate, and I love working with data. So geospatial data is my favorite thing to work with. And in my spare time, I still keep a toe in the academic pool by adjunct lecturing at CU Colorado, and then I just take advantage of all the things in Colorado as well, including spending time with my fluffy dog, pictured in the bottom right. Anyways, okay, so let's talk about what I do specifically, just to give you, and this is one example of a career that exists in the climate risk modeling space. So PwC is a global consulting firm whose primary clients are Fortune 500 companies. So that doesn't mean all of our clients are all Fortune 500 companies, but we do have a lot of Fortune 500 companies. So, and what that means is you just Google Fortune 500 companies and you'll see a list of our potential clients. They're companies that operate globally for the most part. PwC as a whole specializes in providing consulting services for audit and tax. And believe me, when I started at PwC, I had no idea what that even means. To this day, I still don't. But the important piece here is that PwC kind of stands between these publicly traded companies with government regulation. And that's the piece where the climate risk modeling comes in. So I don't know if these slides are going to be available for people afterwards. I'm happy to leave them, but I've included some links if we can give access to participants, just if you're continue to be curious about this. But our team helps companies assess and disclose their climate risk in response to what are called climate disclosure requirements. Oops. And so what that means is there's a few both international, national, and even in the US state regulations that these companies are having to respond to. In the case of the US, for example, the Security and Exchange Commission's just released a set of what are called disclosure requirements, climate risk disclosure requirements. And so these companies have to engage in assessing all of their risk in response to climate change, whether it be due to physical risk, which is things like changing hurricanes, changing heat, et cetera, and then transition risk, which would be risk associated with changing policies. So increasing regulation, increasing carbon tax, et cetera. And then what these disclosure requirements all have in common is that companies have to take a look at their assets and their business operations and then determine how much those could be affected by climate change. And most of the time, it includes climate modeling. So actually modeling out what the impacts would be based on what are both climate models that we use and love, and then also some transition risk models, which are usually IAMs, if you're familiar with that. Anyways, I can answer more questions specifically about that if you're interested. So specifically as a manager, what I do is I oversee projects. So involving like any sort of modeling exercise related to physical and transition risk, but it also involves a lot of admin. So things like engaging with the clients directly. I have to like lead meetings. I lead meetings during model development projects, keep track of budgets, like typical managerial stuff, but I do get some hands-on keyboard time as well. Okay, so I'm kind of going fast here just because I want to get to the fun, like discussing job stuff in a minute. So, but let me give you a couple of examples of what being on the climate risk modeling team looks like. So our overall goal is to help companies identify and prepare for changing weather and climate policy. And actually, I want to pause here just for a second and address this thing in my head, which is that the goal here is to help companies, which I think as an academic can sometimes make me cringe a little bit because it feels like you're working for the man. And but ultimately, what's interesting, at least for the people on my team, is yes, we are helping companies, but in the grand scheme of things, we view it as like helping our world continue to move more smoothly, because whether we like it or not, these Fortune 500 companies have a huge impact on our livelihood, our well-being. They are in charge of the supply chain. They give us goods and resources. So anyways, by helping them figure out how to manage a new changing world, hopefully we can make it better for society as well. I think that's especially the case in the US, maybe not in other countries. But anyway, okay, so there's two pieces really to being on this climate risk modeling team. One is engaging with these clients. So typically what that means is I'm leading meetings with these clients. I may interview different parts of the client teams to understand their operations, their governance. And by the way, this would be with like a group of people, a group of my teammates. We'd learn about where their greatest potential exposures lie. We'd use tools developed by our team, which I'll talk about in a moment, that quantifies some of their risk exposure of their assets and operations. And then we may also help them craft reports for their regulation requirements. So in that case, this type of work requires a lot of soft skills. In fact, I'd say because of that, my interview, which I'll talk about in a moment, for this position was like very much soft skill interview. So getting along with people, a lot of relationships, but also some expertise and being able to distill complex topics to a general audience. That was really important. But then in my case, I'm also partially on the model development side as well. So this means that I'm leading development of both generalized and bespoke physical risk modeling efforts. So what that means is I'm developing tools that our team can use across multiple clients, but also I may build a model specifically for a client. And I'll give some examples of what that might look like. So this means I wear a lot of hats. It involves everything from data collection, so having a good idea of what type of climate science data exists out there in the world, but also being able to manage confidential client data, how messy it might be, cleaning that, understanding it, and then combining all this together into one big analysis for the client, and then wrapping that up into a slide deck and making a good story around it, one that's clear and understandable by the client. So it requires understanding and being able to communicate with the client in terms of what their interests are, like where their interests lie, where they're concerned. And some cases, this means that the client is really enthusiastic. They care about climate change. And those are our favorite engagements, where they want to know more. They're really interested in the modeling. But then because it's regulation, there are some companies that just want to check a box and make sure they don't get fined. And those clients can be a little less invigorating to work with. So I just want to briefly just give an example of what my day-to-day might look like. And so I have a lot of meetings as a manager. It could be meetings with clients, helping them identify and prepare for climate change. It's a complex problem, so there's a lot of discussion that's required. So I regularly meet with business leaders, but also internal and external sustainability teams. And then a lot of internal meetings, just making sure we're strategizing, checking in, making progress. So this especially, I would say in consulting in general, but especially at PwC, it's very, very team oriented. So you're constantly engaging with others. And if you're an introvert, this might be a difficult position. And side note, I'm finding that I'm more introvert than I thought I was. Anyway, but then as a manager, I also, like I said, I do a lot of administrative work. So I have to plan a lot. So I keep tabs on projects, timelines, budgets. I have to communicate a lot, writing emails, making presentations, just to make sure everyone is on track and that we're all on the same page. But then, like I said, I still spend time with hands on keyboard. In fact, right now, most of my time is spent coding. Data still underlies our entire decision-making process. So I'm having to, process those data, research new data, keep tabs on the research coming out with different data sets, or any sort of research that interprets climate models that may impact the type of statements that we're making. So yeah, there's still a lot of coding involved. Okay, so you've heard a lot now about what I do at PwC. Happy to answer any more questions about that. But now I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here. And you may see some overlap with some of Nube's conversation, but I'm hopefully can add a little more color here. I really liked, by the way, how she talked about what makes you decide you might need a career transition, because full disclosure, I think I might be about to go through another one. So I think I'm just going to take a step back and say, I think one thing that's really liberating about working in industry is having that freedom to choose what exactly you want to do. I think, and that said, my first experience was in academia. I pursued a PhD after getting a bachelor's of science in mathematics. I pursued, like Nube, pursued a pure scientific PhD. So I was working with climate models, our ECMWF suite of climate models. I was working on like understanding cloud feedback's role and climate variability. And I had worked really heavily in editing CESM and CARS climate model. And then I pursued a postdoc, but even when I entered the postdoc, I wasn't totally sold on becoming a researcher. I found I had a lot of the symptoms that Nube was mentioning in her last talk, in her talk. So this transition was really hard, especially when everyone around me was like full on pursuing academia. I went to a lot of like how to prepare for your career talks, and it was just like how to prepare for getting a professorship position. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure this really applies to me. So I ended up leaving that postdoc early, and instead I say I became a data scientist right away, but truthfully, what I did was I did a boot camp for data science, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I decided to make this transition. But yeah, I did a boot camp. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, but I've since then helped people kind of follow the same steps that boot camp followed, to be able to grow your skills for pursuing a career in industry specifically. So this is separate from what Nube was talking about, where she was talking about perhaps pursuing a career in a public domain. This is in the private domain. So I think some of the skill sets and the way that you have to apply to these jobs might be slightly different. So that's actually what I'm going to focus on today, because that's been my experience. I decided to pursue data science because I really didn't want to do research that much. I think some of the things that Nube was describing was exactly what I was feeling. Like I felt constrained by having to focus on one thing, like, and maybe even just two things, but for a really long time. I think that kind of upset me. I found that very tiring. And instead, where I really felt like my energy came from was doing the analysis, working on the model. I was really interested in the methods behind things. I really liked the statistical analyses papers and setting up the experiments. Whereas I think moving forward, I was less. I had a hard time thinking of like the next important scientific question to answer. So for me, I would have liked to do things with a team where we were working towards a common goal that we decided on together. I think that to me sounded like a better idea. So in this case, because I decided I wanted to pursue more of this kind of methodological career, one that focused on the data and the analysis, I decided to pursue data science. There's a lot of overlap, especially if you're doing analysis already in your science, which I'd assume for those of you who work with climate model data, you probably have 90% of the skills of a data scientist already. In my case, during my PhD, or postdoc, I did not have any exposure to machine learning. And that's why the biggest reason I did that boot camp was to come up with a example project where I learned and executed machine learning skills, because in the data science industry, that's really important. And from there, I was able to get a job after that boot camp. I can tell you a little bit more about what that looked like. I do have some slides on getting that job. And then, so I worked, the last number 2 says I worked as a data scientist, as a pure data scientist. And what I mean by that is I had no specialty. I just was trying to get any job that I could in industry, like get my foot in the door. So I worked at a health and life insurance company. And they also handled like retirement funds. It was interesting. I think that was a really good experience because I learned about tools that as a climate scientist, I would never have exposure to. And I worked alongside a lot of really, really smart people outside of my field who were PhDs in computer science and astrophysics. And I think we even had an English PhD. But anyway, that was really cool. So I got to work on a large team and learn a lot about just like a variety of different data techniques that were not geospatial. And I think this actually served me really well. So I dipped my toe outside of the climate world for a year. But then when the opportunity arose to move back into climate risk or climate tech, I jumped at the opportunity. So after acquiring some data science skills, kind of hardening those skills for a couple years, I joined a climate risk tech startup. And here I applied machine learning techniques, but also, I mean, mostly just data analysis on climate model, and in this case, hydrological model output. And yeah, the goal was to produce a product that companies could buy to help estimate their climate risk. And here's when I started leading small teams in developing things. So in a similar manner that a postdoc or a professor might like advise their students on an analysis they may do, but still kind of oversee the whole like project from start to finish. Like that's when I started getting that first experience doing that. And then I ended up at PwC, and my goal here was I had been working on the kind of what we call the product side. So I was working on just developing towards this thing that was exciting and fun to do, but then I kind of missed out on what this was actually being used for, which is why I decided to go into consulting, was to figure out and hear firsthand what companies care about, how they're going to be using this data, what action they're going to be taking, what their concerns are. So I think I've learned a lot at PwC in that way. There's a lot of other things that come along with that, with working directly with clients, that I'm not a huge fan of. So that said, this is just my career path, and it's going to change again. In fact, as I mentioned on my first slide, I'm adjunct teaching at CU, the college in Boulder. And yeah, there's a part of me that thinks about moving back into academia. So we'll see. I'm happy to chat more about that too. Okay. Okay, I know I'm kind of taking a long time here, so I'm just going to put up this whole thing here, and I'm not going to read all this. I'm hoping we have, you can pause if you have the YouTube link later and read some of these examples, but basically these are just a bunch of different examples of projects that I've worked on. And in general, I think the key here is you could get a sense of how coding heavy it is. So if you really like coding, you may consider moving into data science or modeling, something that's modeling heavy. If you are interested in statistics, definitely think about data science. You should be close to, well, very familiar with statistics. I don't really think I consider myself an expert even. And I think another key thing on this slide here is that there's kind of a distinct difference between working as a consultant and working in data science, which involves this client engagement, working on a large scale problems. You can see one of my most recent projects at PwC was working across global PwC teams to produce this kind of analysis that businesses might care about that highlight their top tier risks, including climate change. So that was a very interesting project. It ended up being the bane of my existence for other reasons, but it was fun. It was really, really interesting and really cool to be a part of that. So yeah. Okay, now I've talked for so long about myself. I want to make sure I leave time for Anthony. But first, I want to talk about the way that I personally think about the different parts of private industry, at least the opportunities that I've seen. And mind you, my search has been focused to the US. So I'm not sure how these opportunities would translate to other countries. But to start, consulting, that's an obvious choice for me. And I think I've more and more seen opportunities in climate risk modeling pop up at other consulting firms. So if this is something you're interested in and you're interested in working with business leaders and interested in working at that forefront of regulation and climate and business, then I would look into consulting. You can start with PwC and then look up, research PwC and then look up, see what you can find about other consulting firms. Happy to answer any questions about that as well. I think another section or another type of sector that those with a climate science background might be a good fit for is tech, which is actually where I think I might be moving back into. There's more and more startups that are focused on climate risk. It's obviously an important and hot topic. So there's a lot of different opportunities here, both climate risk, but you could also work with insurance tech. You can work with flood, computing projections of flood for a purpose. That's been a really hot topic. Or just, there's there's so many options. I would say in my experience, most of the opportunities are at startups, which come with a different kind of work-life benefits. Like it's interesting. The constraints and the setup are a little bit different. And then you can work at a larger company, which there are larger tech companies that are hiring climate scientists. I just haven't seen as many opportunities in that vein. Maybe it's just my connections. But then there's a whole set of, which I think Anthony will speak more about, where you can work in the finance industry, insurance industry, usually for companies that are really secure. They're large and come with it's kind of like a lot of cushy benefits, I would say. This kind of reminds me of my very first job, even though it wasn't in climate science, but now more and more of these companies are wanting to hire climate science experts to help them estimate their climate risk going into the future. I even knew somebody who there at the last line there, it says oil companies hire climate experts in-house. Not that you may have some ethical, decisions to make if you would do that, but I did have a friend who did that, and he's since left, but it sounded like it was a really interesting experience. So, okay. Oh my gosh, that's taking so long. So, this is kind of reflecting on some of the things that Nube mentioned earlier, but this is just my own perspective of how I've made career shifts. Whenever people I speak with, I also kind of walk them through this exercise. And I think right at the forefront, the first thing you have to do is, if you're feeling some of those symptoms that Nube mentioned, notice those at first. Sounds like pretty meditative, but definitely just pay attention to the fact that you're not enjoying yourself, you're finding it harder and harder to work. It's indicating you might need a change. And then I would say be the scientist that you are and start to, take notes of what it is that you like, what it is that you don't like. I've added here, what do you feel like you're really good at? So in your job, the different tasks that you might have, what is it something that you feel like, you've been complimented on before? You feel like this is pretty easy for you. It's something that you may volunteer yourself for because it won't, it's pretty easy. For me, that was coding stuff. I really liked coding. I really liked working with people. Then, on top of that, what are the things that you enjoy? Now, I have to say, like, if it were up to us, I think all of us would be paid for our favorite hobbies, but that is just not the case. So What at work are things that you've done that have made you accidentally like skip a meal, where you're so focused in on you love it so much, or maybe if you're not so crazy that you skip a meal, but when you're not doing it, that's the first thing you want to be working on. For me, again, that's coding. Like I would tend to procrastinate other tasks so I could do my analysis and, you know, make it more efficient or whatever. So for me, I was always procrastinating things like writing papers to like focus on the analysis and make the plots prettier. And I was like, okay, like maybe there's something here. And that's still the case. I code a lot and I love it. So yeah, for me, and also meeting with people, for me, that was one. But again, everyone's different. Pay attention to the things that you might like. And then last, I think this is important, is can you make a good living, both financially and mentally? So I think this for me was huge, for me in academia, feeling like I had to be at a certain place, like a certain location. I wanted the freedom to be able to move around if I so choose. So that was one reason why I decided to make the jump. But also, like, you want to be proud to be doing what you're doing. That's something that I've struggled with a little bit, but also, yeah, like if you find that you want to be able to go to sleep at night and think, okay, I'm really proud of myself. Maybe that means doing something that's very science adjacent. Or maybe that means, you fall asleep better at night knowing that you were able to take your weekends off and that you have, you're a flexible work-life balance with plenty of benefits. So, okay. I'm like way almost over time here, but if you're interested in private industry, and I'm happy to talk about this in a breakout session or in Q&A, but I've told those who I've helped make this leap, there are 3 ingredients. You need a project that's an example of something that you've worked on from start to finish that illustrates skills that are useful for the job that you're interested in. So again, remember, I focused on tech. So for me, it was a data science project that had some analysis involved. The key here is you want to frame it so that it's relevant for the stakeholders that you're interested in. So that's a really key point. Oftentimes in science, our audience is other scientists, when in reality, like if you're moving into industry, you want to illustrate that you care about what industry cares about. So it could be extreme events, but you have to make the connection to like, okay, but how is an extreme event going to hurt a business? Like, why should they care about it? A resume, the key point here is that you want to make sure it reads as though you already have the position. So that means you look at the job listing, compare it to your resume. They should look very similar. You're using the same language. Somebody who's already in the position or somebody who has a similar position, ask them to take a look at it. Avoid jargon. And then an interview. And I'm actually going to skip to that slide really quick. So here's an example of different ways you can show your project. Here's some tips on making a good resume. Again, I hope these slides are available later. But then for an interview, I just want to spend a little time on this because because of my consulting experience, this interview was the most important part. Often it is. The thing I want to say here is practice what you're going to say. You can look up example interview questions or even just think of them. What are they going to ask you? And just practice talking about it. Because you want to be concise, first of all. Oftentimes when I've interviewed people, they get carried away and sometimes they don't even answer the question I asked. You don't want that. Also, just make sure you review basic concepts that seem like they're, useful for the job, whether it's, okay, maybe I want to practice talking about what the different climate scenarios are, or maybe I want to practice talking about like how hurricanes are going to change in the future. Whatever your expertise might be, just practice talking about those basic concepts. In my case, it was machine learning, probably. And like Nube said, it's okay to say, if they ask you a question, be like, I don't really know that right off the top of my head, but this is what I think it could be, or like I would have to research that. It's better to be honest because basically this is a pretend event of you working there at the company. So if you act like you know everything and then you're wrong later on down the road, that's going to hurt you more than you saying up front, no, I don't know, but I'd like to work towards that. Make sure you research the company. So make sure you know what they do and how you could advance their mission. And then also remember, it's a two-way street. You're trying to figure out if you're a good fit for this position just as much as they are for you. So reflect on the things that you've had a hard time with, and then and make sure you bring them up in your interview. Make sure, you know, I've put some example questions. How are conflicts handled here? What does a path to promotion look like? I like to ask, how much vacation have you been taking? Got to get a sense of your day to day, because you could decide you withdraw your application if it's not a good fit. Okay, that's 30 minutes over. So thank you so much for listening, and happy to answer. Do I do Q&A now, actually, or do I wait? I know I'm really time here.
After Anthony's talk, presentation.
Okay, sounds good.
Q.
Thanks.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Nube, and thank you, Eleanor. I will share my screen. 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you everyone. So I will speak also about the passing from academia to non-academic job with my particular case. So the specificity I've been working on more in the financial sector. So I wait. Okay. So the idea is to give you first an overview of the finance sector, because, for example, when you have been like doing research on climate and etc., then it's like difficult to connect with finance sector, but there are like huge needs of climate scientists actually. So whether it is in finance, but also in companies, but I think Eleanor already spoke about that. So first I will give an overview of my present position. I will also present the climate challenges in the finance sector, also give you some information to understand this financial institution and what are their needs. And also I will give some advices on preparing for job application, and also practical advices directly for the job application and the interview preparation. I think some elements might overlap a bit what Nube and Eleanor already said, but I think I will add when necessary some additional elements. So yes, that's it. So first I will start by my background. So basically I did a PhD in joint supervision between the University of Buenos Aires and the Institut Polytechnique de Paris. And I was more focusing on climate modeling and land atmosphere interactions. So when I finished my PhD, so basically I wanted to change a bit what I was working on. Still, I wanted to keep working on climate, and I had an opportunity at EthiFinance. I started as a senior research engineer in the research team, the research and development team. So at this moment, they are starting to have like more topics related to climate, and I was the first climate scientist in the team. So I was like some kind of different profile from the typical profile they had. But then we developed the activity around like the climate services for financial institution. And this leads to the recruitment of other people, other like climate scientists, also with PhDs in climate modeling. And then like I had the opportunity to have like more responsibility in the company. I was like head of environmental services. Again, it's kind of like what Eleanor presented. It's like manager responsibilities. So I was in charge of the development of methodologies and relation with clients in relation with environmental services. So not only climate, but also the topic like biodiversity, for example. Maybe to give an overview of what is doing the company. So they are basically a credit rating agency. So this is more like the financial part, but they are also an ESG data provider. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. Basically, there are some kind of some kind of scores that are provided for companies. Also, there are some advisory more related to these topics, and then they also have consulting activities, whether it is on ESG and also on financial risk topics. So basically, my main task are management of the research and of the research team, in particular on the environmental and climate topic. Also interaction with the other part of the research team on joint topics. Then I also developed the internal physical risk methodology, physical risk assessment methodology. Basically, there were two needs. One which is like providing like an overview of the level of risk for different hazards. And also they are highly interested in like potential financial losses. So this is where like you can have a mix of climate data and other type of financial methodologies. And then I also collaborated. So this is outside climate, but this is very interesting because like you provide like your expertise more on climate, and then you can also learn a lot working on other topics. In particular, I've been working on the development of other ESG indicators, and I've also collaborated a lot with with the rest of the team on integration of climate into credit risk. Then during my experience at EthiFinance, I also did some consulting for the ING group. So ING is a Dutch bank. They are highly involved into like all the ESG topic. Like it's like their brands. They want to be, how to say, in advance on the environmental topic, on the social topic, and etc. So basically, when I started working for them, they recently created an ESG risk team. And I've been integrated in this team as the climate physical risk expert. So as Eleanor mentioned before, sometimes it's like they use specific vocabulary for climate risk in the industry. So physical risk, it's like risk related to climate. So the impact of climate on the companies, on the asset, on the activities of the bank, for example. And then transition risk, it's more related to the carbon emissions. It's more like the impact of companies or the impact of the bank on the climate. So I keep working on the same task I've been doing at EthiFinance. So I use what I already developed for physical risk assessment, and I implemented it internally. Then I also, so this was very interesting because this is more like the, how to say, technical part. It's more like it's like more coding, working with data, integrating in like the logic of the bank. But then I think half of my time have been spent on providing training on climate and physical risk assessment, and also on climate change adaptation. It's like very new topic for everyone, and most of the time I had a lot of questions. We had a lot of interesting discussions because you're the expert, but still like they are the expert on their topic. So you have to read a lot, you have to discuss a lot, and this was very enjoyable and interesting. And then the physical risk assessment tools that have been developed, I had the opportunity to see it like implemented in many processes of the bank, in particular, for example, so on the activity of the bank. So for example, what are the assets which are at risk for floods, for other type of hazard, but also for the internal business continuity plan of the bank. So this may be more related to, we can connect it as the evaluation of climate-related risk for companies, because bank is also like companies, they are dependent on their offices, on their like data storage and etc. So it was very interesting to provide how to say training on these topics to people who don't know so much about it, and also to work with them in co-production to integrate it in their processes. Maybe one word, which is like the specificity of climate change in finance in particular, it's what is called the tragedy of the horizon. It was from a speech from the governor of the Bank of England. So basically what he was saying is that the difficulty to integrate climate risk in finance is that in finance, usually they are looking just at very short time horizon. They are looking at the following years. In some cases, they are looking at like the 5 following years because it's like the economical cycle. They have these time lengths. And when you're speaking about climate, you're speaking about like 2030, 2050, end of centuries. And I think it's like very difficult for them to have so much forward-looking vision. And this is the difficulty to start implementing like the climate, looking at climate change impacts in this long-term horizon. So in this slide, I wanted to resume like the different big issues that financial institutions in general have in relation with climate, and where the expertise as climate scientist is useful for this type of actors. So first is the regulation. So the banks, they are having important pressures from regulators. Regulators, you have to imagine it's like the central bank, which we are putting like a lot of regulation for the banks, like not being at risk, and that all the economic system is stable. So they are putting pressure on like proper assessment of climate risk. Also, they want the bank to integrate climate in their governance. Like they want to have people like responsible of assessing climate and acting against climate change, against climate risk. And they also have to do a lot of how to say, assessment, reporting, and etc. And also something that I want to mention is that financial institutions, they are kind of key to anticipate climate change systemic risk. So basically, if the banks and the financial institution, if they are integrating climate in their assessment of risk, basically then they will put pressure on companies, and then it's like the full system that will be aware of climate risk, and that will be pressured into doing something. So where the climate scientists are very useful for this type of institution, where there is a need for this type of profile, is more like in the integration of climate-related risk. So as I said, the climate institution, they are highly regulated due to all the financial crisis. And so the risk management is already well integrated. But they don't know the need due to the regulation to integrate climate and environmental related risk in this framework, and therefore in this financial model. But they don't have like specific resources with climate expertise, and this is why like they need people who are knowing like the data set, who are understanding the topics, and who can be helpful to do a proper assessment and integrate it in their models. Also, they have so data limitation and skills gap. So basically, as I said, like there is a lack of knowledge on climate-related topics and concepts, and also of skills to work on specific data sets. So, for example, they have a lot of how to say, machine learning experts, but there are very few people who are able to properly use and process the spatial data. And then some other topics I want to mention. So it's like, how to say, I think it was strange for me at the beginning, going from academia to like financial sector. But I think it's like, how to say, it's like they really care about risk, but then it's like if they don't assess a risk, like it doesn't exist for them. So it's why it's very important to help them on that, and also to avoid like I had a lot of work also on greenwashing. So basically, the banks, they are doing like a commitment to the clients, to the regulators, and etc. on assessment of climate risk, on reducing like emissions and etc. And basically they need like quantitative person with expertise in climate to do the proper assessment, and not going toward like greenwashing, because for them then there is like also reputation risk, and on the opposite, if they are like properly integrating climate assessment, then they can be like a powerful driver for changes. So this was to give an overview on why is climate important in financial institutions now? Maybe as we have little time, I will send the slide after, and then you can look at it in more details. Here I briefly show the different type of actors you can look at if you're interested in financial institutions. So for example, there are banks, there are also the asset manager and funds who no need, so it's not all funds, but basically, at least in Europe, there are a lot of funds which are working with like there are ESG funds. So basically they say if you put your money in our fund, then everything will be put in like companies which are environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and etc. And now they need to do like proper assessment of this, like they don't want to have like the regulators, they don't want to have greenwashing, so they are like pressuring these funds to do proper assessment on these topics, and this is why they need also like a quantitative person with expertise in climate and other ESG related topic to help them doing this type of assessment. Then there is also the insurers on top of bank, like they have a same issue as bank, but also they are sometimes developing parametric insurance, and this is where like climate expertise is also very helpful. And then there are other type of institution in the financial world, like multilateral and development institution. Basically, they are like, I think these will be like the main institution which will fund the climate adaptation and mitigation projects, and in particular in emerging and developing economies. So I think it's they are very helpful institutions, and it can be very interesting working for them. And then you have all the war which goes like around all these actors with, like, for example, the rating agencies, which are now also integrating climate in their assessment, because if you are at risk in relation with climate, for example, with floods, or because you're like emitting, your project will be emitting too much carbon, then you have a real concrete risk, and now they are like trying to integrate that in their methodologies, and also data provider. So I think what's important for banks, and this is why there is a real need, is that up to now they were mostly relying on like data provider for their climate assessments, but now they realize they need to develop real in-house expertise. Because the providers, basically most of the time, they're providing models which are kind of black box, and no financial institution, they need like to, I've been like in some interaction between the ING Bank and the European Central Bank. And basically the central bank, they are like checking the assessment of climate risk. So now they realize they need to have like a in-house expertise, and they also need to have a in-house assessment of risk. And this is like now, so there are a lot of position open in this type of institutions. And and also so this goes with climate and also with like the ESG part. So basically there are like a lot of pressure to do like a more science-based model. I have been able to look at many models available, also a lot of things that were already done in the banks, and most of the time it's like they are lacking like how to say, scientific resources, and most of the time they are missing that in their methodologies. And this is where they have issue when like some regulator, like the central bank, is looking at what the bank is doing. So this is why I think they really like people with scientific background. So this was the part more to present like the financial sector. I wanted to present it in more details because most of the time it's something that when you are in academia, you don't know it. When I was in academia, I was not aware of all of that, and I was not aware that there was like a lot of need on these topics. And now I will give some maybe some recommendation on the process of like looking for a job outside of the academia. So I will give some elements which are specific to financial institution, but most of the elements, they are not specific to financial institution. You can generalize that. And So also this comes from my own experience. So I have been able to like make like a lot of interview, of checking CV and etc. So from the vision I have and the meeting I've been able to add to discuss like different type of profile, and the interview I've been doing with candidates, I will give these elements. So first, before going into interview and etc., you need to prepare yourself for potential interview for the different candidature. So I think one first element which is important is like to build knowledge around the type of position you are interested in. So in this case, I give a specific element for the financial institution. So for example, but I think this is also valid for companies. And Eleanor mentioned some of these elements. Also, this is like maybe some elements are focused like on European context, because this is what I've seen, but in other part of the world, there are similar things, so you can find like the equivalent. So for example, if you want to work in climate, in relation with climate, so banks or like companies, I think it's important to look at, for example, initiative like the European taxonomy. This is like European regulation, which try to describe the activities and define what is a sustainable activity or not. There is a part of the European taxonomy which is related to climate, so climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and then this European taxonomy, I think it's like it's kind of new in Europe. We can imagine that this will also be valid, inspire other initiative in other parts of the world. And basically in Europe, this is what will drive like many different reporting. So reporting, it's like, I don't know, like everywhere a company needs to emit an official report with, so in this case, for example, the assessment of sustainability of the environmental, social governance topic. So in Europe, there is what we call the CSRD. It will start next year, but people are already working on it in the different companies. And this is where also they need like specific competencies on climate. In the US, I think they now have the SEC climate reporting. Also, I think it's important to understand the concept of climate risk in the companies. Sometimes it's like a bit different from what we can see in the academic research. So here, this is why I think it will be interesting if I send the presentation. It's a link. So there is a document from the European Central Bank. It's like very interesting. It's like well written. It defines like the concept of risk for companies and for banks. But they are the same like name and definition which are used in the companies also. So if you want to take a look at it, I think it can be very interesting. Also understand the TCFD main recommendations. So TCFD, it was like a working group trying to define like how can we integrate like climate risk in the companies. I think something that is quite useful. So sometimes they might need like competencies, like people with climate expertise. If you come from the physical climate models, it can be interesting also to just have an overview of what are the EIM, integrated assessment model. Like for example, the ENGFS1, because like most of the time they are really like referring to that. And if they don't have like a physical climate expert, they just have like a climate expert on transition risk, for example, they will only see the climate risk through this. So interesting to have some concept. If you have the interview, you can better communicate with the person. Also stay updated with on climate regulation. And also there are a lot of so this is specific for financial institutions. So there are a lot of interesting documents to read, which are like very well written and easy to read on the UNEP webpage. So it is like the Initiative for Finance of the United Nations. Also some other recommendations. So in general, like prepare your presentation, which means you have to have in mind like what are your skills, like you need to highlight your adaptability. It's fine not to know like doing everything, but then you need to know how to adapt, and this is what you need to show in the interview. I also said like you need to Also highlight your other competencies. So like data science, also, for example, doing a PhD is like a lot of work in autonomy. So it's very important to highlight that. And also the scientific method. So scientific method is like you're autonomous, you know how to like research, propose like, for example, a methodology, write the documentation, so technical documentation. And also I think something that is very important, and sometimes I had the case with some PhD we try to recruit, and the interview were a bit complicated. It's sometimes like, for example, for me it was fine, I wasn't understanding what they have been doing. But for the other people with me from the company, they had difficulty to explain like complex ideas or their thesis in simple words for people who are outside of the climate sciences. So you can also try to work on that. Also, even before like looking for position, you can like don't do to outreach and networking. So it's like you can contact people you don't know, contact people you know because they know someone who knows these people, and demonstrate interest for what they do. So basically what I always recommend is like not writing to people and say, hello, I'm looking for some jobs. It's more like asking like, okay, I'm looking for a job in climate science. I know you're doing like this. Can you give me some, I don't know, give me some tips, or do you know someone that will be interested? Or, you can also ask for short meeting just to ask questions. What is your daily job, and etc. Even if there are no like a real job interview, but this can be like you can have like interesting feedback, and if you're lucky, like maybe they say, okay, maybe you have a position, you can candidate. Just consider that so it depends on the industry and the company. There are like different type of way of working, but always make the hypothesis that these people are like very busy with a lot of meetings. So don't take it personal if they don't answer, if they answer like a few days later. And also if you ask for short meeting, just don't ask for too long meeting, like just like 15-20 minutes, because more it will be like I think difficult for them to be available for very long time. Like also in your research, try to research for companies with incentives to recruit and valorize candidates from academic research. So I heard from some colleagues of mine of other companies. I also had the experience myself when I did like a candidature. Some companies, they don't valorize the fact that you have a PhD. They are like, it's like you can have like much less competencies, and it will be the same. And I think sometimes it's like not like you have to take care of that. Like it's important that your PhD is a plus, because really it's a plus. As I said, it's like work in autonomy, scientific method, and even if you haven't worked in like companies before, you were just doing research, you have to consider like with what you've done in your PhD, you have like some kind of senior, how to say, you're kind of already of senior status, and you're not like, for example, much younger students who directly start working and don't have like the PhD experience. Good things, if you see that, I think it can be a good thing. It's like if there are many PhD in the team, and also sometimes it's the case in France, like they have financial incentives to recruit PhD. For example, in France, we have Crédit Impôt Recherche. So if you find incentive like that, and you know companies in that, you know that they will be like, it's easier for them to recruit PhD. And then more on the job application and interview preparation. So first on the resume, always focus on competencies, skills, also project you've been working on. Don't go too deep, for example, in the, you can explain like in what you've done, for example, in your different like research project and etc. But try to highlight really well like the competencies also, like machine learning, data science, etc. Show also capacity to adapt. So for example, showing that you've been working on very different type of projects. Avoid too much. So maybe it's not like so specific to PhD candidate, but I've seen a lot of candidates who I was like reading the CV or the, what is the name in English, like the cover letter. And now they are using a lot like ChatGPT, and this we can see like quite easily. So So sometimes it shows like a bit of lack of interest, like they're doing quick things quickly and then they're not interested really in working with you. This is like the interpretation you have when you read that. Also, I think it's not the case in all countries, but for example, in France, we need like very different CVs from the academic one. So 1-page CV. And so take care of that. Like if they are expecting like minimal CV, don't send like the academic CV. I think you can, if you're in contact with the people, you can ask like, should I send like the academic CV or like the 1-page CV? And then you need to tailor your resume to the role you're applying at. This is also like a recommendation that have been done, that have been like suggested before by Eleanor, but it's like you need to know the company. You need to, this was also said by Nube, you need to analyze carefully like the position description, like every details. If you're not like, for example, sometimes they're asking like a lot of things, maybe you're not like ticking all the boxes. Still, it can be fine to postulate if you think like that the things that are missing, they are like things that you can learn. You can still try. Then you can also look at the background of the interviewers. If you have them, like it's good also to show interest in like what they've been doing. If they're also PhD in like what they've been studying, like their publication. And this will help you like better understand and connect with the person. And also you really need to like take a look at the company webpage, its activities, story values. Normally the people doing the interview, they will present well the company, but it's also good if you have time to look at it and understand what they're doing. Also be proactive. So you need to be involved in the company. It's not like just interrogatory and they are doing question and you answer. You can also ask question. You can like have more interaction. But also, I had the case with some candidates, you need to listen carefully to them, like to understand what they're asking you and etc. If you're just like taking all the space, maybe they will say like I think it's a good skills also to know to listen, and it's good like to also do it in the interview. Wait. And also prepare for very classic questions. Why transition from academia? Why are you interested in this position? And here it's like always show motivation, but you need to be honest. And and during the interview, so just show you in a like show your good capacity, like problem solver. Sometimes they will ask question like, what do you think about that? Or would you do that? And then maybe you don't have the answer, but this is fine. They want to know like maybe how you think. So you have to adapt. You have to make good hypotheses. Maybe you can say like, I don't know, but if we think that. So this is how you can react to this type of interview. And also have a critical mind. I think it's important. Like for example, if you're answering a question, you always need to have in mind the limitation, and you can speak about that also. And then make connection between your knowledge and other topics. So for example, sometimes they're asking questions, maybe you don't know directly the answer, but you can say, this makes me think about this aspect of climate science, and we do this like this. So yes, and finally, so again, maybe they will test you, they will speak to you about some topics, how would you solve that, and etc. So again, you don't need to necessarily give the exact answer, but show that you're adaptable to their questions. Yes, and I think this also goes back on other comments from the other presentation. So do the best you can, but take it as an exercise. It's like, even if during the interview you're like, okay, I'm not sure I want this job, it's still good like to do the interview 100% to show like, okay, to prepare yourself eventually for other interview. And then after, you can always step back and say, okay, after the interview, like I don't want the position, but take it as an exercise, and it can help you for future interview also. And also prepare specific question. So is the work, like the daily routine? And yes, you can ask the person in front of you, how do they feel about the company also? So you can have like a very important feedback. And after the interview, you can ask for the next steps. So this is normally they will do that at the end of the interview, but if they don't do, like just ask what are the next steps. If you don't have answer after some time, you can ask for news by mail. And also something I think like it's the most important, I will finish on that. If you're refused, it's fine. The most important is to ask for feedback. So for example, if the company say, okay, we prefer another candidate, or we think you don't fit, and etc., I think it can be like very hard to hear. But I think we always have to like stay calm and just say, okay, you can ask for feedback by mail. You can also have like a short 15-minute meeting. And here the idea is what is your feedback on the interview? So they can tell you like, okay, maybe your CV, you can improve it. Like during the interview, I think this was not so fine. And I think while it is constructive, and I imagine it will be constructive, it will help you in the future also. And that's it. So I will send the presentation, and if you have any question, then you can contact me.
Yeah, thank you for our three speakers. And given the time, we will skip the breakout room session. We'll just have a general Q&A sessions, and but we will stop recording so everyone can feel safe to ask any question they want. And so if you have any question, just type into the chat, and the speakers will address the questions.
Yes, I will stop the recording now, so you will be able to ask questions freely. If not, if you have a microphone and you want to raise your hand, we can also give you the possibility of asking your question orally. So I will stop the recording first.